Hello, my name is Stanford Gibson. I'm the Sediment Transport Specialist on the HEC RAS team, and with the recent release of 6.0, I thought it'd be a good chance to show you some of the cool new plotting features we have in Sediment Transport. So the Sediment Transport plotting features have been completely redone in the 6X series since the beta versions, but every beta version we put out, we developed a lot more. This is all the work of a software developer on the RAS team named Zach Morris. He's done a lot of great work to make these capabilities available to you, and we're just going to show them off in this video. So what I have here is I have a sediment transport model. This is an unsteady sediment transport model that is available in the sample data sets. This is all 1D sediment transport output. By the way, we have other videos on viewing 2D sediment output, but to look at 1D sediment output, you're going to go to View. There isn't a button. We didn't get a button on the main RAS window, but you go to View and you go to the bottom because sediment settles to the bottom. And there is a long history of sediment output viewers that have had strengths and weaknesses over time, and all of those strengths have been combined into this new sediment output viewer, the 601, and the other ones will eventually go away. So I'd love for all of you to learn to use this new viewer because it's better. So we're going to open that up. And this is the new sediment output viewer. Now there are actually a lot of new ways that you can look at data, but the kind of classic ways are time series and profile, and we'll focus on those in the first video. And so, the most classic way to look at hydraulic data is in profile, and we're going to look at the invert elevation and the water surface elevation to give us kind of the classic RAS profile, and we'll go to the final to look at it. And so you can see that we have our water surface and our bed elevation, just like you'd expect in the standard RAS plot. One of the things that we've done now is if these variables tend to be viewed together, we've got them plotting on the same axis, so that's really helpful. One of the things that's interesting about this data set is that we have a lateral structure. And this is an example of using operational rules in order to send flow and sediment out the lateral structure into the storage area. And so this is a very simple set of operational rules. And what it says here is, hey, if the concentration at this cross-section is greater than 15,000 milligrams per cubic liters, open the gates and send some flow over into that storage area. And if it's not, close, because we don't want to send flow over there. And so one of the cool things that we can look at is over time, not only looking at the stage and the invert, but we can look at the lateral structure mass diverted. So that's what lat strux mass div means, is the diverted mass of the lateral structure. Now all of these terms, these are going to be pretty cryptic. They're all described in the user's manual. And so I'm going to turn that on as well. And you can see that we have that for every grain class, and at time 0 and at the final time, these plot is 0. But what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to move through time. And this is the original invert and water surface elevation, but as I move through time with our little scroll button up here, you'll see that at some point the concentration gets high enough that we end up sending sediment over the lateral structure. And so what you've got here is you've got your water surface and you've got your bed elevation, but then on this axis you've got the mass diverted out of the lateral structure, both the total, which is the red line, but then also the by grain class. And one of the cool things is that we have a couple of grain class color ramps. And the main idea here is that the silts are gray and the sands are brown, and the gravels and cobbles, those are blue or green. And so you can start to tell what's being diverted pretty quickly by just looking at it. You can look at this and say, oh, most of this material that's being diverted is sand, but then we've got a little bit of silt as well. We can plot these multiple results on multiple axes. If they should plot together, they tend to plot together. If they're on a completely different order of magnitude, they'll plot on another axis. And actually, you could look at as many of these variables as you want. If we plot flow, now we'll plot that as well, and you can see that the flow comes across here and then drops dramatically at the lateral structure. where it diverts the sediment and then rebounds a little bit downstream. And we'll give flow a new axis as well. This can get really busy. There are thoughts about how many axes you should use to actually present data, but this is the way to look at how multiple things change over time. We can go in and add the sediment concentration, but now this plot's gotten pretty busy. So let's actually make it less busy. If you've got a lot of things turned on and you don't remember exactly what you turned on, you can press clear section. And let's switch to time series now. We can look at the time series, and we can look at a time series around the middle. And let's actually look at a time series of invert change. And then I'll turn on the invert change at the first cross section. And so we just have a time series of invert change. And you can see that we're eroding and then kind of giving it back at this upstream cross section. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on a series of cross sections. And the standard plot in RAS is what we call a monochrome plot. Basically, all your time series plot as the same color, but they plot in a monochrome where upstream is the darkest and downstream is the lightest. So you can tell kind of just by looking at this plot that, the degradation decreases as you go from downstream to upstream and actually turns into aggradation. And you can do that just by looking at the time series because of the color ramp. Now, monochrome is usually helpful, which is why we've made it default. Color gives you a third dimension of visualization, which is often very, very helpful. But sometimes it's not helpful. Sometimes it's not exactly what you want. And so that's actually the buttons we've put up here, because it allows you to switch back and forth between this monochrome presentation or kind of the standard RAS line colors that you're used to. If you push this button, you get the good old, black, blue, green, fuchsia that you're used to in RAS, the standard RAS color ramp that you've been accustomed to for years. In general, I think that you're going to find that the monochrome presentation is really useful. Now that works for different stations if you're choosing a time series, or if you choose profiles, you can look at multiple profiles in time, and in that case, the older profiles are going to be lighter and the newer profiles are going to be darker. And so you can see that here you're getting deposition over time, and then in other places you're getting erosion over time. And it's a kind of information dense way to visualize it. And then of course you can switch back and forth to the standard RAS colors. So let's go back to our time series plot, and let's say that you don't really like this color. What if you don't like this color at all and you want to change the color? Well, we've added a lot of features to help you customize these colors any way you'd like. If you go to options, plot options, all of your options are here. And so there are a lot of options here that I recommend playing around with. One is just this button up here. If you switch to multicolor mode and press apply, and pressing apply is the key because OK doesn't actually apply them. OK gets you out. And we do that because that's actually how RAS Mapper works. And we're trying to make this look and feel as much like RAS Mapper as possible so that you have the same workflow. And so then you can go back and forth to monochrome, and that works just like the button. And so there are a lot of other things that you can do here, but the primary thing you'll probably want to do is change the color. And so that's under layers. Again, we've done that to make it look and feel as much like RAS Mapper as possible. And what you'll find here is that we've made available all of the variables that you have viewed so far. And so here we have invert change. And if you double click on this, you'll get a color ramp editor. And if you press customize, you'll get a color ramp selection tool that looks very much like the RAS Mapper tool, because it is the RAS Mapper tool. This is exactly what we use in RAS Mapper. So let's say we want this to be green, and we want it to go from like a dark green to a neon electric nuclear grass green. We could say OK and then apply, and you get your nice green, or nice might not be the word I'd use, but that is an option. And of course, you can also choose any color ramp we already have in RAS. And so you could go up here and say, you know what I want to do? I want to choose the shear stress color ramp that goes from green to red, because that's a helpful color ramp. And we'll say OK and apply. and it'll apply that shear stress color ramp or any of the color ramps that we have in RAS. We have some nice concentration color ramps that can be used for concentration. There's a lot of different things you can do with that, but I like brown for invert, which is why I chose brown for invert. So I'm going to choose reset visualization options. So I'm going to choose the default here. I'm going to press that, say OK, and that'll get me back to my default colors. Apply. That's how you change the colors. And so another thing that you might want to look at is a lot of these sediment variables are pretty complicated because we don't only provide you the variable, but all of the grain classes. And so if we switch back to profile, and I'm going to clear selections because that's more than I want, and I'll go down and just look at the final, and then I want to look at really my favorite variable because it smooths out a lot of the noise. If you watch my videos, you know that this is a variable that I use a lot, is this longitudinal cumulative mass change. And so you can see the longitudinal cumulative mass change accumulates mass change at each cross section from upstream to downstream, and can be really informative because what you see here is that the green is the total. And you can see that despite all of the noise and how different cross sections erode or deposit, this is overall a depositional model, and to the tune of about 350,000 tons. And you can tell that because that's the final at the end. It's essentially a sediment balance. And so that's really useful. But we also provide all those results by grain class. And so if you wanted to only look at the total, you didn't used to be able to do this before, but now you can. If you click on the total, you'll get just the total. And you could look at that at multiple times, or you can select just a couple of grain classes to look at how those grain classes respond. But a really helpful way to look at these data is to look at not only the total, but what is the dominant grain class? A lot of times I'll ask someone who's building a model, hey, what's the dominant bed change grain class in your model? Because you could have a lot of silt and clay. Your boundary condition could be bringing in like 70% silt and clay, but it's all wash load. And so it's almost incidental to your bed change. And so if you look here, what is your dominant bed change variable? Well, it looks like fine sand is your dominant bed change variable because that's the material that has the most total mass deposition. But if you look at this, sands are brown and silts are gray, and cobbles and gravels are gray and blue. And so you can tell kind of immediately that everything that's going on here is sand. This is a sand model. Even though there are silt and gravel in this model, none of that really matters. It's all sand. And then the darker sands are the coarser. And so you can see that like these coarser sands, the darker ones, they deposit first, and then while the finer sands, they deposit farther downstream. Okay. But one of the things that can be really confusing about sediment modeling is that look at all of this output. Who wants all of these output? Let's go back to our original result where we just wanted this water surface elevation, the invert, and the lateral mass structure diverted, where we got this nice plot that showed us where the diverted mass was during the simulation. And I don't really care about all this other stuff, and you know what all this other stuff does is it just costs me a lot of time clicking between runs. Well, we've added some output controls. And so if you go to options, sediment output options, and under quasi unsteady, this is options, sediment output options is closer to the top. And these are the same for unsteady or quasi unsteady. If you choose sediment output options, you'll see that what we've done is we've chosen output level 6. So that says, hey, give me all of the sediment output. Give it all to me. And that's why we got it all. And a lot of times I run it on this because I don't know what I want to explore. But when I get into production runs, I don't want all that output. And so you can drop it down to another level. Or what you can do is you can say, hey, give me the minimum output, and then we're going to add some variables. Or you could say, hey, let's do only customized. And so I'm going to choose only customized. And this is brand new. This is brand new in 6.0. And so then I come over to here to select customized variables, and I get a list of all the sediment transport variables. And now you see this list has lots of variables in it. All the 1D stuff is first, and then all the 2D stuff is later, which we'll cover in another video. But this has got the stuff I want. Common 1D results, invert elevation is one of them, and then I'll go down here for hydraulics, for water surface, and then I'm actually going to go down to lateral structure mass, because that's actually the mass that goes over the lateral structure. It's the mass diverted actually includes tributaries as well. And then I also want to choose it by grain class. And so I'm just going to run those 4 variables. And I'm going to say OK. And then I will see you at the other side of this computation. All right, so that took about a minute to run, but you didn't need to see that. And so now if we go to view sediment output, now things are very different, right? Now we only have the actual variables that we're interested in. And we're going to go to profile, and then I'm going to animate those over time. And there's our plot. We have our water surface elevation, we have our invert elevation, and then we have our actual diverted mass during that time step. Now, a couple of other things that people like is people want to know which cross sections are diverting mass. So if I come here and say, hey, I want to see what's going on at that cross section in particular, you can see up there that we're actually diverting 6.7 tons during that time step. But a lot of times you want to know, hey, which cross section is that at? If you look at the very bottom along the x-axis, you'll see that we're providing both the cross section, here it's cross section 5.31, and the station at which that cross section occurs. Now this is a little bit different than how it works in some of the other RAS plotters, but we are switching to a new plotting tool. In the future, other plotting tools will look like this. This is more like the future will look than like the past looked, but this is the way that it works here. Now, of course, if you want numbers, like in general you don't, in general you want to visualize, but if you want numbers to do your own visualizations, well then you can go to the table. And under the table, we have the main channel distance, we have the cross-section number, and then we have all of the results. And so that's those are the options that are available. You can copy paste that into Excel. All of this is written to a file called the HDF file. If I open up the folder, you'll see that this is Plan 5. And so if I go look at the P5 HDF file, that's where all this data are stored. And you can write R code, or you can write Python, or you can write MATLAB code against this and do your own visualizations. But I think what you see is that we are starting to make these visualizations a lot more powerful. So you have to do that less and less. And so I think that's a good place to stop the first video, talking about kind of these more basic approaches and how to select your variables and how to plot them. What I'm going to do in the next video is I'm going to go into detail about the cross-section plotter, which is something that'll be familiar from the other plotters, and then these 3 brand new ways of visualizing data in RAS. So my name is Stanford Gibson. I'm the Sediment Transport Specialist at HEC, and this video was funded by the Regional Sediment Management R&D Program, which has put together a little work unit to help demonstrate best practices in sediment modeling.